So the top of all our institutional barrels are completely rotten. And obviously the best investment for the globalists is in the civil service, because they're just there, aren't they? We're not in the politics of right and left anymore. We're on the politics of right and wrong, actually good and evil. Horrendous crimes against humanity have been committed, and not just in this country, around the world.
Hi, my name's Emma Dunwell and welcome to the Resistance podcast. I'm joined today by a fantastic guest who has had a lot of experience in Parliament, both as a Conservative MP and independently. He's also campaigned on many fronts and is a very big name in the freedom movement. I'm pleased to welcome Andrew Bridgen. The first thing I wanted to talk to you about was, obviously, you've had a lot of experience being a member of Parliament, being in that world. And obviously everything in the news lately, it's all corruption, lies, secrets, cover-ups. What was your experience working with these people? And did you experience any of this corruption firsthand?
Yes, but initially when I was first elected, I mean, I wasn't in the politics bubble. I was never supposed to be an MP. I was a very successful local businessman in Northwest Leicestershire who was annoyed with the way the country was going, got a group of friends together who were also small and medium-sized business owners. We took over the council in 2007, standing under the Conservative banner. Conservative never held the council in Northwest Leicestershire, really, since 1983 when the council was formed, the area was formed. And I stood for MP, was told by David Cameron, we're never going to win this seat, we're not sending you any money for your campaign. But I said I didn't need his money, I got my own. And we were going to win. So he called my seat a dump in front of my prospective constituents. Wow. So I told him if that's what he thought, he'd best not come to my constituency again. And he is a man of his word sometimes, David Cameron, because he never did come again. So that was all right. Yeah. So I got into politics, and I can remember in 2011 saying to Cameron and Osborne, because they were regarded as these great politicians, that we don't really need good politicians. What we need is policies that make life better for our constituents and make them feel more secure, more prosperous, and that their children, the next generation, have got better prospects than we had. That's all we need to do. I said, and we'll get back in. And they laughed at me in 2011 and said, you don't understand, Andrew, it's all a game. And I don't think I did understand in 2011. But I do understand now what they meant. And I was only thinking, I've met and spoken to every Prime Minister since Margaret Thatcher, and some of them I've known probably reasonably well. And they're just qualities just got worse and worse and worse. And there were many things during my earlier parliamentary career which always felt like corruption or a conspiracy against the people. And whether that was the post office scandal, which I exposed, or the modern slavery in the garment industry in Leicester, which in the faster fashion industry, which no one wanted to talk about, or lots of other things. And it was always felt that the good legislation that really would have helped the country, you just couldn't get it moving. And the bad stuff, it was flying through. And I said many times that I came into politics to help the people of Northwest Leicestershire make the area better, which we did, but to help the country. And you came in to do good things. And doing good things and, in principle, and stopping bad things happening inflicted by your own government, they're still good. But, I mean, I spent my time trying to stop bad things being inflicted by my own government most of the time. And that's not as satisfying as doing good things. And I always thought it looks like a conspiracy. But then I looked at the characters that were running the country, supposedly. David Cameron and George Osborne, Theresa May, Boris Johnson. And I couldn't think it was a conspiracy, because these people aren't bright enough to run a conspiracy.
I mean, that's a good point.
So everybody said, well, it's got to be cock-up because they couldn't run a conspiracy.
Yeah.
They couldn't run anything. So it's got to be cock-up. But only, in the, over the last 4 years, when you realise it is a conspiracy, but it's not their conspiracy, they're just puppets, then it all drops into place.
Well, I did want to ask you about Dominic Cummings. Obviously, there's a video that's going viral of him exposing Parliament and saying that all cabinet meetings are scripted. Is that true?
I believe it absolutely is.
Who makes those scripts? Is it their agenda,
You
or
can
is
always
it coming
tell.
from
You can
somewhere
always
else?
tell when there's immense resistance and pushback to what you want to say. Because when I used to get meetings to discuss topics they didn't want to talk about with ministers, whether that was HS2 or the fact that Gulf War syndrome is actually a result of the vaccines that were given to our armed forces before the
Sorry,
Gulf War.
Would you mind just quickly explaining what Gulf War syndrome is?
The fact is that a large number of service personnel who served in the Gulf suffered some very bad illness as a result, bad health as a result. But what we do know is from the data is that people who served on ships that never got near the battlefield, 500 miles away from the sarin gas and the burning oil rigs, they've got it. The French ship that served next door, they haven't got it because they didn't have the vaccines. And we've even got service personnel who were vaccinated, ready to go, but say had an injury or an illness and never went. And they've got it, but they never went to Iraq, but they were vaccinated. And the meetings you have with ministers about things like that, there's never any civil servants there because they don't want to take any minutes. Yeah, plausible deniability. I had Vince Cable contacted me about a year ago about the post office scandal. He was, he was the business secretary in the coalition government.
Okay.
And he contacted me by email and he said he recalled that I was the only MP that ever asked for a meeting with him to discuss the Horizon post office scandal between 2010 and 2015. And he wanted to know if I could remember the date.
Right.
Because the civil servants have lost the minutes of the meeting.
Isn't that convenient?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. And that was Vince Cable.
So, I mean,
the
corruption runs so deep.
But it's not just the politicians, it's the civil servants. I'm afraid I've come to the conclusion, and I'm afraid I really wish I wasn't right, but I am, that not all the apples in the barrels are rotten. But of the institutions, each one has got a barrel. All the apples at the top of all the barrels are rotten, and any apple that seeks to rise to the top must rot.
Yeah.
So the top of all our institutional barrels are completely rotten, and obviously the best investment for the globalists is in the civil service because they're just there, aren't they? Cummings will know everything. I think he probably feels that he could be hauled up to answer for what he knows. I mean, I've looked at some of his tweets where he more or less hinted that he did know all about the midazolam and morphine euthanasia of the elderly, the vulnerable elderly who were taken out of hospital in 2020, early 2020, to make way for the expected first wave of COVID patients who never arrived and became, sadly, I think, euthanized in care homes and nursing homes with midazolam and morphine. Now, it's a very cryptic Twitter message that he put out a couple of years ago, which more or less says that if you come after me, I'm going to blow the whistle. I mean, he should blow the whistle.
Yeah, absolutely he should. The people deserve to know the truth.
Yes. Well, I'm afraid, Emma, that horrendous crimes against humanity have been committed, and not just in this country, around the world, particularly the Five Eyes nations and Europe, with regard to what's gone on in the last 4 years. And unless we have a good clear out and hold people to account, I mean, how are we going to get over this? Because I think the truth's going to come out about the vaccines. I think most people know now there's something seriously wrong with the vaccines. The lockdowns, the masking. I don't know if you saw, did you see the American Congress's Oversight Committee report on?
No, I don't believe I have. Do you want to briefly give us a rundown?
It was a 2-year investigation into lessons to learn from the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right.
And over 500 pages. I saw the conclusions, and basically it's damning. So everything that was done was wrong. It says that there was never any scientific evidence that masking prevented anyone from catching anything.
It just increases your CO2 intake.
Well, I mean, the holes in the masks are 800 times larger than the virus. So
Wow.
I think I could probably squeeze through a doorway that was 800 times bigger than me. So that was all debunked. The social distancing, there's no science behind any of that. As Mr. Fauci admitted under questioning, it just sort of arrived, that policy, and was enforced. The lockdowns, disaster, particularly for young people. Americans, children, devastated. Suicides in girls between the age of 12 and 17, up 51%.
Wow.
We've got 1 million under 25s in the UK now, and we're on a waiting list for mental health support. And I can tell you now that the suicide rate in Northwest Leicestershire went through the roof. At one stage, we're having more suicides a month during lockdowns than we had in a year on a normal year. And the government denied there was any link between lockdowns and suicide.
It's totally undeniable.
I was in the chamber of the House of Commons and asked a question that during lockdowns in Northwest Leicestershire, the suicide rate rocketed, and asked the minister how much it went up in his constituency. He was the health minister, and he said there was no link scientifically no link between suicide rates and lockdowns. And we got people losing their businesses. I mean, in that time of 9 years, from when I was first elected in 2010 to 2019, and then at that election I got 63% of all the votes.
Oh, wow, that's
20,400 majority.
It's very impressive.
By then, I and my councillors, we'd moved Northwest Leicestershire from regarded as the poorest constituency in Leicestershire to the richest. Economic growth, highest economic growth in the country. Built 800 new houses a year, high quality. We piloted and developed, that Building Beautiful the government adopted.
Yes, I heard about that.
We'd been doing that for 10 years. We called it Building for Life.
I cannot tell you how much I hate these ultra modern homes that look just like boxes.
Lego
Where's
boxes.
The character?
Yeah, we'd not been doing that for 10 years.
Yeah, we need to bring back beautiful architecture.
Absolutely. Building homes, building communities, not just houses.
Yeah.
And a bit of investment in the design to start with. Because, houses aren't just a short-term asset. They're an asset for future generations not even born. If you build them properly, they're a future asset. So more care with that. And when we'd done all that, we got to the stage with 1.2 jobs for everyone of working age in the constituency. So we were a net importer of labour. That kept the wages up. And so by 2019, from the most deprived town in Leicestershire, which was supposedly Colville, a gritty former mining town where I live, we were the only part of Leicestershire or Leicester that's got above average household incomes.
Wow.
And because we built enough housing, we kept the house prices about 30% off UK averages. So higher than UK average incomes, 30% less than that UK average house prices, sweet spot. So people can pay get a decent job locally, pay the bills, go out on a Saturday night and go on holiday from the airport at East Midlands to wherever you want to for a couple of weeks. That's happiness for most people, and we delivered it in Northwest Leicestershire. So just before that election in 2019, we were the happiest place to live in the Midlands.
That's so lovely to hear, and I wish that more people in the position to do so would be doing projects like this.
With the right councillors, and every one of them has gone now. They've rooted every one of them out. it's not a full-time job for an MP. That was just one of the project, was to convert Northwest Leicestershire from a poor area to a wealthy area. And we had a strategic advantage. We're centre of population of the UK. We've got good communication links, an airport, M1, M42, A50. So a third of all the jobs in Northwest Leicestershire now are logistics or distribution. And I just happen to be the only qualified transport manager in Parliament. So it was completely in line with everything that we had going for us. Absolutely brilliant. And then obviously 6 weeks after that election, the COVID madness started. And, I got people who'd set businesses up who were going to, financial ruin. I got constituents going for a walk around Foremark Reservoir, which is right. The car park is more or less on the border in Leicestershire. The reservoir's in Derbyshire, and people were being arrested for walking around with a flask of coffee, accused by Derbyshire police of having a picnic. And they were actually arrested and charged.
Oh, what violent thugs! You'd having a picnic.
Well, Derbyshire police went mad during the lockdown. I mean, they were putting drones up over the Peak District, filming and prosecuting people who were walking on their own on the hills.
Wow.
I mean, there's something seriously wrong there.
Yeah. They're not even in a crowd of people or anything. They're literally walking on their own in the open countryside.
Yes, because they're saying they're breaking the lockdown rules.
I mean, the restrictions of freedom, even now, without the lockdown, with that being been and gone, we still are seeing such huge restrictions to our freedom that since COVID just haven't returned.
Well, they really want you to censor yourself. Freedom of speech is the most important freedom we ever have. Without that, there can be no other freedom.
Yeah.
If I can't tell you what I think and you can't tell me what you think, and we can't record it and put it out for anybody else who's interested to argue against or argue for, there is no other freedom. And that's what they really want to get at now. And they really want you to censor yourself.
Well, I did want to ask you about, because I'd like to go into, obviously, the vaccine injuries and that sort of topic. But I wanted to ask you, what is the reason that you are able to talk about COVID vaccines now? Because obviously 3 years ago,
you get called an anti-Semite.
Well, yes.
Anti-vax, anti-scientific, anti-Semitic, racist.
Fascist as well.
Yeah, I've been called that by Rishi Sunak and Matt Hancock, neither of which have got a science degree. I just happen to have a science degree from Nottingham University in biological sciences with biochemistry, specialising in virology, genetics and behaviour. And as for anti-vax, I took 2 of the damn things. I took 2 AstraZeneca shots and they hurt me.
Oh, really?
So, how can you be anti-vax? I am anti-vax now because I took 2 and they hurt me. What do you expect me to?
Well, I had 2 AstraZeneca and I've got health problems as long as my arm and I'm 20 years old. And
as Einstein said, when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do?
Wow, I like that.
Well, Rishi Sunak just checks his stocks and shares, doesn't he?
Oh yeah, of course. It's just like when Labour were in opposition, they never actually had anything of substance. Their whole demographic was just putting down the Tories, and they didn't actually have anything to offer themselves.
Yeah, this right and left of politics, the illusion of choice,
division game.
It's just a division game. It's a distraction. Everything that's going on in that chamber of the House of Commons, as I said when I was there, it's a pantomime.
So what do you think it's a distraction from?
Well, the fact is that all the major parties, and I will include Reform in that, they're all owned by the same people. And they can, as we saw with Starmer, you can promise anything you want, lie, let's tell it what it is, a lie to the public, get voted in. And most of his votes were actually people who previously voted Conservative, just couldn't vote Conservative because they'd been betrayed so obviously. So they sat on their hands, and Labour got in with Nigel Farage's help, because he couldn't have possibly got his massive majority without that. And they're all owned by the same people. So it doesn't matter who you vote for. As I think someone said once, if voting made any difference, they wouldn't let you do it, would they?
Well, yeah. If it really mattered, and if they were truly going to keep their promises, and then there would be some kind of law to stop them from breaking their manifesto.
All the parties are signed up to Agenda 2030,
Yeah.
which no one wants to talk about in Parliament. No one wants to talk about it. No one wants to talk about the WHO pandemic treaty.
Well, there are certain things that, because obviously there are things that no one wants to talk about through fear of getting cancelled. And then there's been straight out bans of mentioning certain things in Parliament, such as the Southport Coverup. I don't know if you had any
That's unbelievable.
thoughts on that. I mean, it's just the story. It's just the story that keeps on giving, isn't it?
It is, and I mean, I've heard lots of stories around it. You know that which I don't know the veracity of those, but I mean, we should never be in a position where Parliament is banned from.
Yeah, no.
And I can only presume it's because it's politically embarrassing for someone. Well, that's no reason.
Well, their reason is always that they think the public won't be able to handle it. So what is so bad about it that we won't be able to handle it?
Oh, everything that takes away your freedom is always for your own good.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
But I mean, this is an absolute guarantee. You will always be asked to give up freedoms for security. And anyone who's willing to give up their freedom for security, I promise you, they'll end up with neither freedom nor security. But that is every tyrant's playbook. And they're going to play it again. So you've got to give up your freedoms because of man-made climate change. It's for your own good, for the greater good.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a load of bunkum.
Well, do you think that the Southport Coverup is just one of many that just so happened to slip through?
Oh, yeah. We've got the
we've got over 10,000 on the terror watch list. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, but, I mean, so many cover-ups. You know, the infected blood report, was it the Longstaff report? It accused politicians of deliberately covering up the harms for decades.
Wow.
You know, I think it's a 2,500 page report. It was only out a couple of weeks before the election, and I didn't have a chance to read all of it. I mean, one part of it, there's a report of doctors deliberately knowingly infecting a school of haemophiliacs in the UK with the infected blood, and just to monitor what happened to them. And they were quoted as saying, "It's cheaper than buying chimpanzees."
That's just pure evil.
And this is pure evil. And I asked the minister, and it was pure evil that so many politicians had covered this up. And it's all in the report by the judge, the Longstaff report, which is why it's taken decades and decades and decades. I've been fighting for one of my constituents from the top end of the constituency for all the time I've been an MP on infected blood. He's never had his money. He got a bad blood transfusion. But the fact is, I asked them why, clearly crimes have been committed against people.
Yeah.
That report is clear. The judge has said criminal activity. And it's a crime to cover up a crime, to knowingly cover up a crime, which they have done. So, why aren't people being arrested?
Yeah.
Why aren't the doctors who deliberately infected?
Oh, well, people are being arrested, just not the right ones.
Well, no, you're you'll get arrested for some hurty words on social media, but you can infect children who are in care with infected blood to monitor what happens to them, and it's all right. I mean, we're in the sort of area of sort of Dr. Mengele, aren't we? And I think we've been there for a long time. I think what happened during COVID, it's been a bit of an eye-opener. Slapped me right wide awake, actually.
Well, yeah, I bet it did. I mean, a lot of people really started to wake up to these things on their own because of the first-hand experiences they had. I mean, like I said, I've got health issues from having the vaccine. I can't prove that it was the vaccine.
No. But mysteriously, it
happens.
It happened straight after for me as well.
My great-grandmother, she made it to 95, right? She was 95 when the pandemic hit, and she was perfectly within her faculties. Like, it used to shock me. She had the vaccine, and then within 6 months, she deteriorated so quickly and developed... my mom used to be a carer, and my mom said that she developed one of the worst cases of dementia she'd seen in a very long time. And there are a lot of people that I've spoken to my friends about who also have other grandparents and everything like that who have had similar instances, and they just keep pushing it. And what's so heartbreaking is how much they push it on children.
Well, of course, when I spoke out in December 2022, that's the reason I spoke out then, was to stop the government from vaccinating the under 5s in the UK. And despite they'll say that I was a conspiracy theorist, anti-vaxxer, they never dared put it through in the UK. So
Wow.
it did do something. And the BBC said to me, why are you willing to sacrifice your political career on the hill of vaccine harms? And I said, because that's the hill you're killing my people on.
I love that. That should be like a quote or something on a poster.
And said, what about your career? I said, well, what does that matter now?
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, if everything is scripted, I mean, we clearly don't live in a democracy.
No. And when I spoke out, I mean, what the public don't know is that so many of those politicians, I mean, I'm not stupid. I knew there'd be a big pushback from the establishment. Just, they wanted to vax the little children. They like making the money out of them. I went to lots of politicians, people I knew and respected. Some of them said they were vaccine harmed themselves. Some of them said they'd had heart attacks.
Wow.
Some of them had got relatives who were paralysed from the neck down. Some of them, their wives came to me and said, I told him not to have them, and he's got a heart condition. But none of them would speak out. They all told me, they wished me well, but they wouldn't be speaking out.
Do you think that there will be any hard truths, like actual truths, coming from the COVID inquiry?
Well, the Americans have had their oversight committee report. It talks about the vaccines and said that they were rushed through and they were not tested properly and there was going to be problems. There's no transparency about vaccine harms and excess deaths, that the public have been misled about the safety. Certainly there's no efficacy at all. They don't stop. I mean, why would you have something that's so experimental that's not going to stop you from catching it or transmitting it? It's okay. So even if they were safe, why would you take a drug that's experimental and doesn't do you any good, doesn't do anybody any good?
And has magically been able to be invented and rolled out globally.
Well, that's not true. I knew 2 years ago now, after I spoke out and stopped them vaccinating the babies in the UK, we had Christmas recess and I flew to America and spent that recess at my own cost in Washington, and I met with some senior politicians out there, including Ron Johnson, the senator from Wisconsin, and we discussed what was going on then, and we knew then that the American Department of Defense had developed the virus and the vaccines prior to COVID, and that it had been sent to Wuhan for finishing, and it obviously come out the lab there, almost certainly released on purpose, and possibly at the military games that they'd had out there earlier in 2019. It may well have been released then.
Yeah.
And we knew it was a bioweapon. Both were bioweapons, the virus. And what we decided was that the public weren't ready for that. We couldn't possibly say that. We needed, because the pushback from the mainstream media was so great that we needed a staged release of even the freedom, the truth movement.
Well, am I right in thinking that you have maybe not a personal relationship, but you're friendly with RFK? Is that right?
Yeah, when the Conservative Party threw me out of the party, I think it was April 23. Not one of the MPs I'd served with for 13 years texted me or came to see me. And within an hour, I got a phone call on my private mobile phone from Robert Kennedy Jr. He said it was disgraceful and he'd back me.
Wow. How did that feel?
It was surreal. I mean, you can't mistake his voice, can you?
I know.
Yeah, so that's great. And we've stayed in touch. And I'm really encouraged that he's going to be in charge of health and food in America in Trump's administration. And not only that, you see, good people recruit good people. I think Trump's a good guy on the whole. We're all human. We all have our faults.
Absolutely.
But he recruited Kennedy. Kennedy's a good guy. Kennedy's recruited Dr. Jay Bhattacharya as the new head of the National Institute for Health in America. That's replacing Anthony Fauci.
Right.
Jay Bhattacharya was one of the original signatories to the Great Barrington Declaration. I've met him. He's a great guy. He comes over as really good. And he'll recruit good people.
Yeah.
And, we've had some very, very bad people in positions of responsibility around the world. And we need to turf those out. We need to get some good people in who can actually work for the people they're supposed to be representing. And we've got to hold the people who've done these appalling things to account, wherever they are, whether that's scientists, doctors, civil servants, politicians, and make them really accountable. First of all, to get the trust back in the system, because trust is going to evaporate. I do think Trump, God forbid that they do anything to try and kill him again or assassinate him.
I was going to ask if you think there'll be more attempts.
Yeah, I think there will be, and I'm hoping that he's going to have the right protection around him, but also Bobby Kennedy and his team, they need the protection, the vested interests. Remember, before they threw me out the Conservative Party, they said to me, this is in January 23, giving me the option really to shut up about the vaccines. They said, Andrew, there's currently no political appetite for your views on the vaccines. There may be in 20 years' time, and you're probably going to be proven right then. But in the meantime, you need to bear in mind you're taking on the most powerful vested interest in the world with all the personal risk for you, which that will entail. They weren't lying about that. And it's those same vested interests that would like to see Trump, Kennedy and everybody else removed.
It sounds like you're quite hopeful because, I mean, this whole COVID thing and the control that the WHO has is just immense. I mean, I believe it was the Tanzanian president a few years ago during the height of COVID.
There were 4 African leaders that were assassinated or had coups, and every one of them had said that they were not getting involved in any of this nonsense about COVID and lockdowns and vaccines.
Well, I believe one sent in a COVID test of a papaya and it came back positive, and so he made him look like a fool. He proved that they were nonsense.
Yeah, and he was soon got rid of.
Yeah.
And Prime Minister Fico in Slovakia said he wasn't going to enter any of that WHO pandemic treaty. He said we're having nothing to do with any of that in Slovakia. He's against the war in Ukraine. And he said we're going to have an investigation into what went on during the pandemic, the lockdowns, the corruption, and the safety and efficacy of these vaccines. And then he was shot 4 times, wasn't he? Wow. By another lone wolf. Always a lone wolf, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's always an unnamed gunman or someone
with mental health problems.
Yes. It's always something that can be explained away, isn't it?
Yes.
It's honestly, it's terrifying.
So they had a good go at him as well. It's not an African problem. It's a worldwide problem. If you go against the narrative, you're going to get cancelled. Then they try and bankrupt you, and if that still doesn't work, then they kill you.
People are feeling a glimmer of hope, like you said, now that Trump's getting in with the truths about COVID. But also, he's coming in at a time of immense pressure and chaos. Do you think that there's a possibility he could be strong-armed into a war with Russia? And do you think that Putin is perhaps trying to hold back until he can maybe make some kind of deal with Trump?
Of course. And it's worse than that. Putin's a very clever man. He doesn't want a war with the West. Russia's it's the largest country in the world. It's got the most natural resources in the world. Why the hell would he want to invade Britain with all our problems?
Yeah.
Who'd
want to take on the responsibility?
It's just absolutely ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous that he's any threat to our security. What you've got to remember is, and especially young people who weren't there, when we won the Cold War and the wall came down in 91, the Minsk agreements we had with the Russians or the Soviet Union were that we wanted Germany to reunite, East and West Germany, that had been partitioned since the end of the Second World War. And the deal was, to Gorbachev, we told him that let us have East Germany back to join with West Germany. We won't move the EU or NATO any further east, right? And
NATO's moved over 1,000 miles closer to Russia since 1990, I think.
Yeah.
And that was like Putin's one condition.
That was his one condition. So it always starts, the EU moves first, so they become EU members, then a couple of years later, then they join NATO, and that's been the progression. And Russia were very weak after the end of the Soviet Union. They're not so weak now, and for the last more than 10 years, Putin has said to the West in unequivocal terms, so far and no further, you're not having Ukraine, in NATO and having missiles based there that would be hitting Moscow in 20 minutes. Now,
That's happened now, hasn't it?
well, yeah, but he meant nuclear missiles. But I mean, the missiles that we're firing, and bear in mind, they are our technicians. There's no way the Ukrainians can fire ATACMS or Storm Shadow, British Storm Shadow, or French Scalp missiles. They are our technicians. We'll call them technicians. A few months ago, they were in armed forces, possibly weeks. That's where, and we're firing those now. In the Cuban Missile Crisis, America took exception to the Soviet Union at that time placing nuclear missiles in Cuba, which is 90 miles off the Floridan coast. And the world thought that was quite reasonable. I mean, it'd be like, how would the Americans feel if Mexico joined with the Chinese and in a defense pact and put Chinese missiles on
it would
the
be
Texas
rather
border?
Unnerving.
Well, I mean, they wouldn't stand for it, would they?
No.
Well, that's what you're asking Putin to stand. And he's warned for 10 years that he's not going to have that. When you think about it, he demonstrated his Orezhnik missile the other week, didn't he? That's the missile that flies at Mach 11. So you can't shoot it down. There's nothing to shoot it down. And it fired it at a military a weapons plant in Dnipro, on the Dnipro River, and it just devastated it.
Wow.
What he did that for was to demonstrate he's got this super hypersonic missile with a lot of kinetic energy, multiple warheads, but it's also he made it very clear and said, look, if I'm going to attack the West, I'm going to use this.
Yeah.
Because you can't stop it. And I will I'll tell you where I'm going to hit, and it'll give the civilians time to get out, because I'm not giving anything away by telling you I'm going to hit this town or that factory, because you can't stop it anyway.
Yeah.
Right? You have to remember that the national sport of Russia is chess. We play football, they play chess. So they're deep thinkers. There's been rumours for 8-9 months that there's going to be a false flag nuclear explosion in Europe.
Wow.
Or a dirty bomb, which is nuclear material with conventional explosives, which will just contaminate a whole area. There's plenty of nuclear material floating around Ukraine. They've got loads of nuclear reactors, and the war's raged all over them. Putin doesn't want anyone blaming him for a nuclear attack to set off a third world war. So by showing you he'd got the Orezhnik missile, which is not nuclear, it's conventional warheads, but has the kinetic and destructive ability of a nuclear weapon. We haven't got any of those. No one can say they've set one of those off when they haven't, right? That's just to neutralise anyone trying to false flag him.
Yeah, it's a show of power as well.
But and also he said, well, if he's not going to set a nuclear bomb off, he doesn't need to. So I've got these.
Yeah,
these aren't nuclear bombs, but they're as powerful as nuclear bombs, and that's so that no one can do a false flag nuclear detonation and blame it on the Russians. That's why he did it. Now, the other recent interesting development on that front is Major General Coverups' assassination in Moscow, where he was coming back to his flat and the scooter filled with explosives.
Yeah, I've seen this on the news.
They have arrested an Uzbek who they think had planted it.
Wow.
But it's been claimed as responsibility. It's been claimed by the Ukrainian Secret Service. Now, Major General Coverup, he was in charge of Russia's chemical, biological, and nuclear attack and defense.
Okay.
And in a few weeks' time, he was going to give a full presentation on all the American-run biolabs that they've captured in Ukraine and what they were doing and who owned them, which was part of like the Biden empire.
Wow, I mean, it's just insane. I mean,
it's just a joke. I mean, Zelensky was a comedian before he became the leader of. That was his job. He played the part of the president in a comedy series in Ukraine, and then he became the president. I mean, I've seen a video of him playing a piano with his penis.
Oh my gosh.
Right? Not necessarily the person I was expecting.
No.
An essential skill to be leader of a
That's
country.
not something that you'd
Well,
ever
I mean,
connect
he's now worth mysteriously about 1.3 billion. I didn't know being a comedian in Ukraine paid that well. Where do you think the money's come from?
Yeah, it's very, very dodgy.
And I think Ukraine have been losing slowly for well over a year. I urged our government to negotiate the way out of it for the Ukrainians over a year ago, and they refused. I mean, I asked them if they were going to, is the plan to fight to the last Ukrainian, and it would appear that that is it.
Wow.
Now, Zelensky knows, and let's face it, he's on a good screw with all this money that they've been having, and they've screwed over the Ukrainians. So 1 million Ukrainians soldiers are dead, men and women, mostly men. So they've lost a whole generation of young men. The country's devastated. BlackRock have bought a third of all the farmland in Ukraine, which is some of the most fertile in the world, but the breadbasket of Europe. And BlackRock have got the contract to rebuild the country post-war. And BlackRock owns most of the companies that have sold the weapons that have caused the destruction. Sounds like a monopoly to me.
Well, yeah, and then when you throw in the photo of our government being pictured in a meeting with BlackRock only a few weeks ago.
Oh, worse than that, Starmer said that he's in partnership with them.
Yeah. Oh, it's just it writes itself.
Starmer the socialist.
There's been many plays on his name, and all of them. Angela Rayner, Rachel.
You mean Free Gear Kia?
Oh, Free Gear Kia, Two Tier Kia. We've got Rachel Thieves. There's loads. I'm struggling to think of them now, but they are brilliant. I read a few of them sometimes.
Defiance Records brings the best music from the freedom movement. From Ramise's Never Give Up and Mad Mix's You're So Right, available as a double A-side on Defiance, to Raw Milk Conspiracy bringing back purpose to music with their latest single This Is England 2024 and their brilliant debut Misinformation Whore, available on Defiance Records. Join the Moo World Order.
The amount of money that we've got going out of the country is astonishing.
11 billion for helping developing countries cope with climate change.
Yeah.
The climate's always changed.
Yeah. Well, I'm doing an environmental study course from home, which I took the course before I kind of woke up. But now I use it as a kind of way to be like, oh, so this is what they're teaching people my age. This is what they're teaching. And literally, I should have brought the book. Literally, there's a paragraph in there that basically says that climate change is all down to colonization, racism, and all these types of things. And it was asking me to write a paper on the inequalities of the coffee industry and how covert racism is still a thing today. It's like, what has this got to do with climate change?
Well, of course, and the carbon dioxide scam, the gas of life, 0.042 of 1% carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. When I asked politicians years ago, they were saying, well, 10%, 7% carbon dioxide. 0.042, 420, maybe put 430 parts per million. Below 200 parts per million, the plants will start dying, and 3 months after that, we won't be here because there's no food for anything.
But they'll blame the cows.
But that methane stuff's rubbish as well, because methane's in a cycle. So 8 to 10 years after the cows produce the methane, and most of it's coming out of their mouths, by the way, not...
Yeah, I was going to say, they barely...
Not the other end.
They barely fart, do they? It's
burping. It's burping, yeah. So this is... but methane's in a cycle. So after 8 to 10 years, it breaks down to carbon dioxide and water. So all the methane being produced by the cows today is replacing the methane that... was broken down from 10 years ago. So as long as you haven't got radically more cattle than you had 10 years ago, which we haven't, it's not going to make any difference. It's just a cycle. Besides which, the cow's eating the grass, and the grass captures the carbon.
Yeah.
Can you imagine in America before it was colonized, those millions and millions of buffalo that used to, obviously they weren't causing global warming, were they? When they were wandering the prairies, they reckon that some of the herds were so big they galloped by for 3 days solid.
Really?
Yeah. But I mean, they weren't producing methane, were they? But, that is was one of the biggest scams out. But I mean, you've got thousands of scientists now, independent scientists, coming out saying there's no climate emergency. The climate's always changed. I mean, in glacial terms, we are in an ice age because there's ice at the poles. Because most of the world's history, there isn't any ice at the poles.
I was going to say they keep chipping and changing, because a few years ago it was like, oh, we're on the brink of an ice age.
Well,
now we're on the brink of acid rain, seas boiling, and all this sort of stuff.
We're in an interglacial period of an ice age. That's where we are now. I mean, we're probably now as warm as it's going to be on the Milankovitch cycles, and it's going to start getting colder again soon, which is why they're pushing all this stuff now, because they haven't got many years left before it's become apparent it's getting colder.
Well, we've got all these net zero projects that are just not doing anything. We've got billions upon billions going to foreign climate aid when we only factor 1% of the global emissions annually.
Well, China's increasing its emissions by more than the UK's total emissions. Yeah. Every year of this decade, the last decade, and the next decade. So whatever we do is pointless. And carbon dioxide, its relationship, it is a greenhouse gas, but its relationship with temperature is logarithmic, not linear. I.e., it doesn't go up like that. It goes up like that. Okay. So, and 90% of the global warming effect of carbon dioxide is below 200 parts per million. Well, below that, the plants would die. So basically, it's like double the amount of carbon dioxide. You're painting that wall red. You paint it red. You paint it red again. Double it. It's not a lot redder, is it? And you paint it a third time. It's no redder. That's the relationship between carbon dioxide and temperature. It doesn't keep going up. So there's probably from 435 parts per million. There's probably 0.2% of the warming effect still to be done. We've got it all. And they blame carbon dioxide, and we've got to get rid of. I mean, I was in a debate at Exeter University a couple of months ago with Carwyn Jones, or as they called him in the crowd afterwards, Car Crash Jones, the former First Minister of Wales, who was propounding, that this man-made. He said that carbon dioxide was a poisonous gas and we should get rid of it. There'd be no life on the planet without carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide and water is what plants produce all the carbohydrates really that we consume and animals consume come from that. It's crazy. It's a cult. It's a bit like the COVID. It's become a cult, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not about the science anymore. It's about narratives, isn't it? It's how you feel about it. And the feeling is shaped by the narrative of the mainstream media, and it's completely wrong. I'm not sure who we're going to have to reserve more prison places for, politicians who've committed treason against the people, or the mainstream media journalists who knowingly went along with it. We've got a lot of work to do with the younger generation who sees the global warming, net zero narrative as some sort of religion. I mean, intelligent young people at Exeter University, I mean, they're completely sucked in by the false narrative and the propaganda.
Yeah.
They don't want to have any kids because the planet's going to burn up in the next 10 years. Well, no, it's not. And the climate's always changed. We know that. And it's not always slowly. Humans are resilient. We need to just go with it.
We've managed to keep going so far.
Absolutely. I'm full of optimism. And you say what, Trump, Kennedy, as long as they get in on the 21st of January, which is why everything's going crazy at the moment, because the World Economic Forum and their placemen and women around the world, they are panicking.
Oh, they are biting their nails right now.
So we've got these strange drones. They're just trying everything they can to intimidate and scare the people.
Loads of people are torn. Oh, is it aliens? Project Bluebeam? Is it man-made? Is it this? What's your take on it?
Well, I do know is that there's no way whatsoever that the American Department of Defense don't know exactly who's flying those drones, where they're coming from, who's made them. There was one came down on a street in New Jersey, and I saw that about 5 foot across one of the drones.
Oh, I think I saw a photo of that. Yes, it was huge. It was like the size of a truck.
Yeah, and it's made by a company owned by BlackRock.
Oh, well, isn't that a shock?
I mean, aren't they all? I mean, they're all, aren't they?
Yeah, they're all owned by BlackRock. I mean, I remember my mind being blown when I found out that the competition between just companies is an illusion and they were all owned by the same company.
And when you've got companies that are more powerful than sovereign nations and the lobbying power, it's just unhealthy.
Or when you've got companies that their net worth is more than all of the political leaders in the world and all the people that are supposed to have the most influence,
Yes.
it really brings into question, what is it that's really influencing us? Where is it coming from?
I think it's pretty obvious, isn't it? I mean, our political class has sold you out. I mean, they offered me a bribe. They offered me anything I wanted in the world to sell the people out.
Wow. I wanted to ask you about Tony Blair, actually.
Tony Blair.
I mean, his staff, am I correct in thinking that his
Tony Blair Foundation.
Well, his staff is bigger than the next 5 lobbies put together.
Yes.
That's just insane.
And you know what's interesting about Tony Blair? He got in 97. There have been a lot of years, a very similar situation. I think he's influencing Keir Starmer.
I was going to say,
that's
is
why
he
you've
still
got
secretly running the country?
That's why you've got Mandelson, the Prince of Darkness, we used to call him. Oh, wow. He's now going to be the UK ambassador in Washington. I mean, Tony Blair's government. I'll just give you one little, for instance. Do you know what the first thing that Tony Blair legislation he put through in 97 when they took over from the Conservatives?
No, what was it?
It was never in their manifesto, and no one could understand it. It's a bit like what I said in 2011. I didn't understand. I didn't get it then, but I do get it now.
Yeah.
Tony Blair, the first thing they did in government, the new Labour government, was they took the death penalty out of the Treason Act.
Oh, right, okay.
Why would you do that? I mean, I'm not going to commit treason against the people, so I would have no interest, And, that's the first thing they did. He's also the next heir to the throne of the World Economic Forum after Klaus Schwab.
Really?
Yeah, that's been out there for a long time. He's going to take over. He wanted, he wanted us in the euro, and if he'd got us in the euro, the deal was he was going to be head of the European Union, president.
Wow.
That's what he wanted, but obviously that didn't work out. That's what got me into politics, actually.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
Business for Sterling and the No campaign, keep us out of the euro. So otherwise we would have been sunk. That's it. So now he's just coming at it from a different angle. Yeah. But his foundation are advising governments all over the world. He's got his tentacles into all these different governments, and that's why you've got all these governments are in lockstep. They all made bizarre decisions during the pandemic about lockdowns, masks, and mandates. All of them, all those governments. We'd got one. We got I think, multi-decade plan for dealing with the pandemic. Just ripped that up, threw that in the bin, and went with something different, which everybody else in the world went with, which is going to be exposed by the Americans as a complete failure. The Hallett Review in the UK, I think it's a complete whitewash. If you remember back to April, I had a debate in the Chamber of the House of Commons on excess deaths and the pandemic response, and the motion that was votable at the end, which passed, was that the Hallett Review should immediately open up Module 4, which amongst other things would deal with the safety and efficacy of the vaccines. Right. And the House of Commons voted for that. They supported my motion.
Yeah.
It went through. I wrote to Hallett, said, look, the House of Commons has voted, you should do this. Okay, you're an independent inquiry, but we want you to do this. Get on with it, And I got a letter back, not from her, but from her secretary. That's the regard to at the time elected member of Parliament who'd won a debate in Parliament and a vote. And she said that they would not be opening up Module 4 until January 2025 as they planned. And that was in April. That has cost lives.
Wow.
And that Baroness Hallett needs to be held to account for that. That's another cover-up. They know exactly. Well, the Scottish COVID inquiry is quite interesting because I don't know if you've covered any of that, but they're actually doing it properly. And when you look at the Scottish COVID inquiry and the Hallett Review in the UK, you wouldn't think they were about the same.
Yeah.
We had the same lockdowns, we had the same vaccines. They're exposing the midazolam and morphine situation. I think Police Scotland are investigating potential manslaughter.
Do you think that could have positive impacts on on us here in England. Because
anyone who speaks the truth and brings the truth to the attention is on the positive side, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what has shocked me is how few doctors are willing to speak out. They will speak out to me privately. A lot of them will. But I mean, I also am very worried that the Lucy Letby case is that I think she was going to whistleblow on what was going on in our maternity wards. And I think they sorted her out and gave her that prison sentence to dissuade the others. The government minister came to me in July 23 and said that her sister had taken the Moderna booster and was now paralysed from the neck down. And I said, I'm really sorry about that. But obviously, you know now, so you will speak out. You'll stand with me and speak out about the vaccines. They're not safe and effective. She said, well, my sister's a nurse and she works for the NHS, and they bullied her into having it. And you know what the NHS are like for whistleblowers. And I said, you don't need to mention your sister. I said, you've got hundreds of thousands, 100,000 constituents. I'm sure plenty of them have written to you about these vaccines. You just use that. Don't mention your sister. Anyway, she just turned around and said, I'm not speaking out, and then just left me.
It just makes the people that do speak out like absolute gold dust. I mean, we're doing, during the COVID inquiry, we're having vaccine injured guests on to talk about their stories and talk us through it. And I just think anyone who can tell the truth and really shine a light on these things.
One of my own constituents came to me early on, and he'd Stephen Miller, and he was an engineer. He mapped out areas for the quarries locally for where they're going to blast next and all that IT and stuff. He was on a very good job, and he took 2 doses of, I think, AstraZeneca, and he felt bad after the second one. He was tired. Then he went to the doctors, and he said he was sitting in the doctor's waiting room, and the receptionist was staring at him, and he noticed, when someone's staring at you, don't you? And he said to the receptionist, "Do I look that ill?" And she said, "Yes, I'm ringing for an ambulance."
Wow.
And they took him to hospital, and he got 75% left ventricular failure.
Oh my goodness.
He then got a diagnosis last year from Glenfield Hospital, which is the heart hospital in Leicester, of vaccine-induced cardiomyopathy. He was given less than 5 years to live, unless he gets a heart transplant. He was in his 40s at the time. He lost his partner. He lost access to his 3-year-old son. He lost his job. He's in danger of losing his house, and the maximum payout will be £120,000, and he's going to lose 30 years of his life.
Oh my God.
At least 30 years of his life, and that's £120,000.
That's just absolutely heartbreaking.
Yeah, and last time I saw him, he'd got a resting pulse rate of 148 beats a minute, and we were in a cold room, and he was sweating.
Wow.
And he went from perfect health to that in a few months. But it's not the vaccines. It's not the vaccines. They're safe and effective. Rishi said they're very safe, Did he mean safe investment?
Yeah.
Because they've got immunity from prosecution.
Well, Bill Gates came out not too long ago saying that vaccines is the best investment.
20-fold return on his money.
Yeah.
Yeah, he might find it's not quite such a good investment when he's hauled up before a court.
He's very cocky, though. He applied to be a member state of the UN.
Yeah, you know why? I've heard a story that Matt Hancock's applied to a job at the UN, but he didn't get it. You know why they all want jobs at the UN, don't you? Immunity from prosecution. You get diplomatic immunity. You can't be prosecuted. That's why they all want jobs at the UN.
Really?
Yeah. What use is money to you when you go into prison?
Yeah. What?
That's what they get. So the WHO is part of the UN.
Yeah.
That's basically, the UN's owned by Bill Gates and the Chinese Communist Party. They've the World Health Organization, part of the UN. So the Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus he was appointed. He was appointed as the candidate for Bill Gates and the Chinese Communist Party. Now, our government opposed that at the time. The Conservative government opposed his appointment as head of the WHO. But now everyone in Parliament is quite happy to give them the WHO powers to Dr. Tedros, who is unelected, unaccountable. They don't pay tax anywhere in the world either. They're immune from taxation. That's handy, isn't it?
Yeah.
And
very convenient.
And they've got diplomatic immunity, so he can't be prosecuted. I mean, that's quite a handy thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's so blatant as well. You would think that anyone with half a brain would look at someone and if they're going for a job where it means that they can't be prosecuted and they have immunity, what are they trying to hide?
Well, exactly, and why is it that if these people, these organisations are doing these great goods for the world, why do they need diplomatic immunity? You're doing good things.
Yeah.
No?
It's the corruption goes just so deep.
Well, anyone who can't see it now, when are you going to wake up?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Well, none of my family is me and my mom are the only ones who.
I think a lot of women did wake up, but they're quite intuitive. I think they did wake up before most of the men.
Yeah. Do you think?
But yeah, I think a lot of people are waking up now. You know, you've got a Conservative government that didn't do anything conservative. You've got a Labour government inflicting horrendous things on the country.
A dictatorship.
Yeah.
Basically. Yeah. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. I mean, if free speech is going down the pan, we're essentially, with the removal of the winter fuel payments and now the propaganda surrounding the assisted dying, we're killing off our elderly. Not only that, none of the younger generation are going to be able to ever own anything. No. You will own nothing and be happy.
Well, I'm hoping that what we're going to see in America is a radical change. And this will demonstrate to the world how changing the people at the top, changing the policies, can turn a country around very, very quickly. And America is a dynamic economy. And I think Trump and Kennedy will turn things around immediately. And I think it's going to, whether that's on stopping illegal immigration, stopping the net zero nonsense, which is making everyone poorer, colder, and less free. Or any of the other policies, it's going to create such an appetite in the so-called democracies around the world that the clamour for something similar is going to be irresistible. And the tsunami of truth, which will come across the Atlantic, will sweep away pathetic little politicians that we've got in this country and around the world, like Starmer and Badenoch. Oh, Badenoch, sorry. Badenoch.
That's another one for the list.
Yes, I mean, to be honest, if they all chucked in together, they couldn't pass the 11 plus. They're not good. They're not good, and that's what they want because they're all puppets. Yeah. People are. I think things that are going on today in the world, I think people are being seen for what they are. Yeah. Whether it's corrupt judges, corrupt heads of police, what's gone on with Tommy Robinson, people being locked up for a few hurty words and. I mean, I was on GB, your namesake, GB News, a month or so ago, and that's the first time I've been on for 6 months. I don't think it'll be getting me on again recently. And I was defending Tommy Robinson and saying that he shouldn't have gone to prison, and I tried to make the analogy with the Hugh Edwards situation, and of course, and Andrew Pearce, who was interviewing me, said that Hugh Edwards was different. He cut me off and wouldn't let me speak. Ended the interview and then said that Hugh Edwards hadn't really committed a crime.
I saw that.
That went millions. Well, the thing is, in the public, probably that's what he thinks. Because see, Hugh Edwards had bought £2,000 worth of child pornography from someone. And there were many analogies with Tommy Robinson, you see, because it involved a phone. Well, Hugh Edwards said to the police that he'd lost his phone. He was convicted off the phone evidence of the person who sold it to him.
Wow.
Well, it's handy that he'd lost his phone and they couldn't see who he'd passed it on to, probably at the BBC or anywhere else.
That's just incredible.
Yeah.
Double standard.
Whereas Tommy Robinson wouldn't hand over the codes for his phone because he was protecting the victims of the grooming gangs. People who've been sexually assaulted. His sources as well. So, but he was sent to prison for not doing that.
Yeah.
But the police accepted that Hugh Edwards had lost his phone. That was it. That's fine. Very handy. Yeah.
It's just
Only the names have been changed to protect the guilty. So the paedophiles get a suspended sentence. So it can't have been an important crime in Andrew Pierce's mind, you see. If it was a serious crime, he would have gone to prison, wouldn't he? Paedophilia is not serious, you see. But contempt of a civil court.
providing evidence
Providing
in a
evidence
documentary.
in a
How
documentary
dare you?
that proved that he was absolutely right and there'd been a miscarriage of justice. Yeah. Did you watch it? Silenced.
Oh, of course I did.
You're brilliant.
Absolutely. As soon as it came out,
Absolutely.
watched it, reposted it, dropped myself in it there, but okay. I mean,
Me
the thing
too.
is with Tommy Robinson is whether you like him or lump him, even if you don't like him as a person, you don't like his views,
He's telling the truth.
the fact that someone has been imprisoned for this amount of time at all, but let alone for this amount of time, for putting out a documentary is absolutely insane. It's insane. And that's what people aren't getting. It doesn't matter if you like Tommy Robinson. The fact is, people are being imprisoned for free speech.
Okay.
That is a problem that's going to
Okay.
affect everyone.
Okay, so the judge who sent Tommy Robinson down
Yeah.
was Judge Nicklin.
Right.
Do you know who the barrister was who was for the prosecution?
No, I don't.
It was Aidan Eardley. That's Matt Hancock's barrister.
Is it
The
really?
same one that's we're up against. And Aidan Eardley tried to get Judge Nicklin to sit on the case that I've got against Hancock.
Oh,
And it just happened to be that I believe, allegedly, that Nicklin is the head of chambers that Aidan Eardley's in. And he's now also a judge on the King's Bench as well.
It's a club.
And we're not in it. And I don't want to be in it. They offer me plenty of chances to come into the club in Parliament, but it's fairly distasteful, mostly depraved.
It's all it all just screams selling your soul to the devil. I mean, the higher up you go, the more dark it gets.
Absolutely. And you can sell your soul any day you want to, but you'll never be able to buy it back. Never afford to buy it back. And that's why they're desperate now. I think this corruption bandwagon through the judiciary and the legal profession, the police and the politics and the civil service, I think it's out of fashion.
Yeah.
So there's not many people jumping on the corruption bandwagon now, but they are having to push out their long-term corrupted people to... I mean, what's Boris Johnson been since he was Prime Minister? He's basically shilling to keep the war going in Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, he went quiet for a while, but he burst back onto the scene and now he's everywhere.
Well, I mean, he appears to have made 10 or 15 million since he's been Prime Minister. I mean,
wow.
He's basically a paid lobbyist for the military-industrial complex. He said a couple of weeks ago that we'll have to have British boots on the ground in Ukraine, and we come back to Zelensky. He knows the game's up. His only chance of staying in the game is to get NATO directly involved, troops on the ground, air support in Ukraine. And the Americans and the British and the French, by giving him those long-range missiles, the ability to fire them into Russia, he's given him the tools to try and provoke Russia into doing something, or which will start a third world war and get us involved. That's like letting Zelensky, as an alcoholic, giving him the keys to the wine cellar.
Yeah.
And you wonder what on earth is going on. They're just so desperate to escalate. But Putin is wise to what's going on, and I'm hoping that he has the forbearance to wait until the 21st of January, and then we can deal with it. But I mean, why is Biden allowing this? He's got no mandate. He's a absolute lame duck. Trump won with a landslide, and one of the reasons he won is he wanted to stop the wars.
Yeah.
Well,
he did say a very bold claim. He was like, if I was president, that wouldn't be happening.
24
that
hours, he said,
that would be
24 hours,
Yeah.
I'll stop the war. Well, I mean, the moment he says to Zelensky, the game's up, we're not sending you any more money, the game's up. Yeah?
Well, I was wondering if you thought that there was any connection with this, with the recent infiltration by a Chinese spy.
China, I think there's a lot of infiltration. I mean, you remember a couple of years ago, there were 2 Chinese spies working pass holders in Parliament.
Yes, I remember seeing that.
They never told you who they were, did they? I can't tell you who they are, but I can tell you who they were working for.
And who's that?
Alicia Cairns, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee.
Oh, wow.
Wow. And even better, Tom Tugendhat, the security minister, had given one of them a pass. So he was in charge of MI5, MI6, GCHQ. He gave one of the Chinese spies a pass.
So we're essentially just welcoming them in.
Well, one would have to ask questions about the vetting process, wouldn't you?
Is there a vetting process? It doesn't seem like it.
Well, I'm struggling to get my former member's pass 6 months after, and I did 14 and a bit years as an MP, and if you do more than, so I did 4 terms. If you do more than 2, you're supposed to automatically have a.
Well, yes, but if you go against the narrative,
you struggle on
we don't
everything.
live in a meritocracy anymore.
No, I
like
don't know
they
if
say.
you ever saw on the videos that after I spoke out on the vaccines, the office they gave me as a 12-year serving MP, through a 4-term serving MP, they gave me a cupboard where they'd boarded the windows up.
Oh my gosh.
That's where they moved me to.
That sounds cell-like.
That's called a cell, isn't it? A
small windowless room.
It wasn't that small, but they'd boarded the windows up in it.
That's just so
pathetic.
Very
isn't
dystopian, isn't it?
Well, I felt sorry for my staff because they had to work there, and they weren't getting any sunlight.
Well, we all know what that does. I mean, that's not good for you either. I mean, it's just that if they can't get you with this, they'll get you with that. They can't get you with the food, they'll get you with the light, ventilation. I mean, do you think that there's any hope of us escaping the many poisons that surround us every single day?
The threats? Yes.
Any of it, yeah.
Well, they're all linked, so we either get out of all of them or we don't get out at all, do we? That's the choice. And people are waking up, whether it's waking up over the net zero or the chemtrails, the geoengineering or whether it's the vaccines and the excess deaths or the WHO or the war in Ukraine, people are waking up. And one thing is, when people have woken up, it's a bit like pulling the curtain back and having a peek what's behind the curtain. And when they see what's there, they can't help but going and having another look. And there's a lot there for them to see. And once they've woken up and they realise that perhaps things aren't quite how we thought they were or hoped they were. And I've done more praying in the last 4 years than all of my life. And most I've been praying that I was wrong about everything, but I'm not, unfortunately. Once they've seen, there's nothing that the government are going to do to persuade them that it's not. I mean, they're asking you to deny the evidence of your own eyes and ears. So, I mean, how many people would take a vaccine now? Safe and effective was the marketing slogan for thalidomide, which you'll never remember.
I was going to say, could you go into that a little bit more?
It was that was brought out in 1959 by a German company called Grunethal. It turns out they'd recruited ex-Nazis into their scientific department, into their medical department. It was an anti-nausea drug which was often prescribed to pregnant women for morning sickness. Its selling point was that you could not overdose on it, so you have as much as you want. And it became it was withdrawn within 2 years, 1961. They think that in West Germany alone, they were selling a million packs a day at one stage.
Wow.
I think 60% of the babies died, of the pregnant mothers who took it, and 40% ended up with life-changing disabilities. It turned out that thalidomide prevented angiogenesis, which is the formation of blood vessels. So depending on the stage of development of the fetus, when the mother, and how much of the drug the mother took, was the severity of the disabilities. But basically, you ended up with very, very short arms and legs.
That's awful.
Some with no arms and legs at all. But most of them died. Most of the babies died. And it was withdrawn. And the marketing slogan of thalidomide was safe and effective.
That's like this Ozempic that comes on.
Yes, exactly. That's going to have the same problems with the side effects. Well, Grunethal also had an injunction. I believe it was against the Times newspaper, when the Times used to be the thunder of the newspaper of record fighting for freedom. They're a shadow of that now. They're completely bought and paid for by the lobbyists. But they turned over that in 61, 62. After that, because they'd been banned from mentioning anything about the harms that legally banned, an injunction for them writing about the harms that thalidomide had done. And when that was turned over at the Strasbourg Court of, I think it was the Human Rights, 3 judges ruled that it was illegal. And they also, you see, although thalidomide was withdrawn in 1961, the word thalidomide was never involved in a debate in the chamber of the House of Commons until 1972, 11 years later.
Wow.
And as I said in the chamber of the House of Commons a couple of years ago, I wasn't going to let that happen this time.
Yeah, that's quite the delay.
And the judges said that speakers of the House of Commons, and it wouldn't just be them, it would be the whips' offices, had colluded to ensure that all mention and debate of questions and debate on thalidomide was suppressed for 11 years. And it was 12 years until the compensation scheme was set up. So the disabled children were 12, 13 years old, but they never had any money. Got no arms and legs.
I mean, disability equipment, all these things, it was just all fronted to the parents.
They ended up putting, and of course the directors of those responsible for thalidomide at the company Chemi Grünenthal did a plea deal and put £3 million up in a pot for compensation, that was all, in return for immunity from prosecution. How about immunity from prosecution? Lifetime immunity.
Lifetime?
And they made a lot more money out of thalidomide than they'd ever put in. They actually upped it to £5 million in the compensation pot. £5 million for, I mean, nowadays someone would probably get that for a lifetime of care for one person.
Yeah.
And you're talking about tens and tens of thousands of victims and untold victims who were never born alive. And so Big Pharma's been a problem all the way along. And Big Pharma and politicians and civil servants colluding to cover up crimes against the people. That's not new. It's very old. The reason it's still going on today is because we didn't stamp down hard enough on those that were doing it. They got their immunity, just like they've got their immunity now. Well, I think Trump's going to take that immunity off them in America. And since we've had the same vaccines and the same profile of injuries, we should be taking it off them. And how can they still have emergency use authorization? 3 years after we had them?
Yeah.
So 6 billion people have had these jabs, but there's still emergency use. We haven't got the data. Well, we have got the data. The record level data of all the doses, dates, and deaths from the Czech Republic, about 11.5 million records, clearly show that the vaccines are killing people, and also that the most dangerous of the vaccines is Moderna, which of those who take it has the worst outcomes. Pfizer's not safe, Pfizer's bad, but Moderna is 15-20% worse than that. There's more reports on the yellow card and the VAERS for the COVID vaccines than every other vaccine ever.
They make up more than 50%.
Yeah.
It's astonishing.
Yes.
And it was like triple the number of polio vaccines, and the data had been collected since 1968, and the polio was the next highest one. Yeah,
and how many people have had that? We've got 50 years of polio vaccines, minimal harms profile, and then any other drug would have been withdrawn for a fraction. I mean, even this week you've got Moderna, their RSV trials in children vaccine, mRNA vaccine. They had to suspend that this week. You won't see that in the media. Moderna's trials had to be suspended. 5 of the children in the trial had to go to hospital with harms. mRNA. Data from America on the under 5s, the ones that I stopped our government from giving out, no protection whatsoever to the children in America who had it, 250% higher chance of catching COVID-19 if you're vaccinated. That's because it's damaged their immune system, which means they're more prone for everything else, and cancer. It's just crazy. They bought the regulators. They hijacked the regulators. So the Medicines Healthcare Product Regulatory Agency in the UK, 86% funded by Big Pharma, the people they're supposed to be regulating. So you've got regulatory capture. You've got Big Pharma fund all the universities, the research. They've captured the university, so people aren't sitting in universities saying, this doesn't make sense, we shouldn't be doing any of this. And then when you've got brave people like Professor Norman Fenton speaks out about it, and then they cancel him and force him to retire from university. Now he's the emeritus professor because they forced him to retire. But I mean, he's going to be the people that they've forced out of universities, hospitals, doctors who've been cancelled and had their license revoked. These are the principal people we actually need running those institutions.
Well, yeah. And also so many younger people, so many students who have been kicked out, expelled, detentions, and all these sorts of things.
They got the students
because they refused to go with the narrative.
But also they've used the students as weapons.
Yeah, they absolutely have.
Professor Fenton, he had to resign because in the end his students, and he teaches statistics. He does statistical analysis of data. He's not bothered whether he's analysing vaccine harms or how many swallows eggs. It's a process.
Yeah.
Bayesian regression, probability. His students said they didn't want to be taught by him because he was an anti-vaxxer.
That's just crazy.
Yes.
You have someone presenting the facts to you.
That's the cult. We've got to do a lot of work with the younger generation. It's no good going to university. I mean, I went to university when about 2.5% of people went to university. I had a full grant because my parents didn't have any money. The country could afford that because not many people went to university.
Yeah.
Now it's 44% of people go to university. And universities should be there to teach people to how to think, not teach them what to think. And now, whether it's climate change, whether it's the vaccines, they're teaching young people what to think, and that's not an education.
Well, they don't want thinkers, they want workers.
Well, looking back now, you see, do you know why Tony Blair set all this in He set it that nurses and police officers had to have a degree. Do you know why he did that?
Why?
To get them into the debt trap. So that they could not by getting them into the debt trap, they can't afford to lose their job, can't afford to speak out, can you?
Right, I see.
Yeah, because he knew where it was all going to go.
The more we talk about it, the more it just becomes very apparent that this isn't just a plan that they've cooked up in the last 10 years or so. This has been generations in the making. And do you think that I don't know how far out there you go with so-called conspiracy theories, although I think that as Candace Owens said, if you're not a conspiracy theorist, you're not an intelligent person this day and age.
Well, what's the difference between a conspiracy theory and fact? It's about 6 months now, isn't it?
Oh, well, yeah.
In fact, I'm going to have to get some, I've said I'm going to get some new conspiracy theories because all my old ones are all true. They've been proven true.
How far do you go into thinking that we've got the world leaders? Are they the ones who are really running the world, or is it people that we've never seen their face?
We don't see their face, so you might know some of their names.
Yep.
About 40 people.
Very small group.
Then they're working their methods through SWAB and the World Economic Forum and Gates. There won't be many to arrest.
Well, yeah.
And I think they're mainly Malthusian eugenicists who believe that there's far too many people in the world. Well, if they led by example and left, I think we'd feel a lot better.
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
So I think next year, I think we're in for a very, very bumpy ride. Anything could happen between now and the 21st of January. Buckle up, but don't live in fear. They love putting the fear onto us, and it's a lot of fear out there. And I think 2025 is going to be the year of truth and justice, I hope.
I really hope
so. And
so.
I'm going to be pushing as hard as I can, praying for Trump and Bobby Kennedy and his team. And I'm afraid we are relying on America. The New World needs to come to the aid of the old again. But we're very closely linked. And our absolutely corrupt mainstream media will not be able to avoid reporting. It's going to be fascinating. So I'm not sure. Knowing all the journalists who work in Parliament, I mean, the number of times I sent them all the data on the vaccines and everything that was going wrong, they just can't deny it. They're as culpable as the politicians. And what are they going to say? Oh, we didn't know. Well, they did know, I can promise you, and I've got the emails. They all knew. They all knew. They all chose not to know. Just like 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when I went to them and said, these postmasters are all innocent, and here's the evidence, and there's the statement from the Fujitsu whistleblower. This is my constituent, Mr. and Mrs. Rudkin, and it's a conspiracy against them. They wouldn't run that. They wouldn't run that for 10 years. It's exactly the same. So that system has been in place for a very long time.
Yeah.
Didn't want to talk about the modern slavery in Leicester, which everyone knew about in the fast fashion industry. All our politicians are telling us we're going to be at war with Russia in the next few years, possibly the next few days, if they had their way. But they've been constantly running our military forces down. We just shut the last steel plant that can make weapons-grade steel in the whole country, Port Talbot, because of the environmental. Everyone talks about the environment, but this war in Ukraine, it looks like it'd be very damaging to the environment to me. All these explosions, left, right, and centre, the carbon footprint of a war. No one ever talks about it, do they?
No.
No, that's a good war. None of it makes sense, and they want us to. We've got to prepare ourselves. We've got to be willing to eat bugs at the same time as they don't want us to grow our own food.
Well, it's all about forced veganism, isn't it? I mean, everything with Bill Gates buying up farmland and looking to make genetically modified mass production food farms. I mean, it's just terrifying.
Bill Gates has said they planned out for the pandemic in 2019. Event 201.
I was going to say, didn't they run an experiment before the pandemic?
They ran it before, and he invested in Pfizer in September 19, handily just before 2019, just before the pandemic was announced. Made a massive load of money, sold his shares, and then rubbished the vaccines after he'd sold them. But the BBC took £55 million off his foundation, and they let him on the television telling everyone that everyone's got to have these vaccines. No one's safe till everyone's had the vaccines. You've got to have the vaccines. That was his products. They have a no advertising policy on the BBC, but they did make an exception for Bill Gates.
Well, for a massive donor like Bill Gates.
I remember speaking to a Guardian journalist, some low IQ individual working for the Guardian, and he was putting a smear campaign on me. The headline's going to be anti-vax, the disgraced former Conservative MP, anti-vaxxer Andrew Bridgen, whatever. And I said to him, "That's your headline, okay?" So I said, "Are you going to put in there that you take money from Bill Gates?" And he said, "Well, we do take money from Bill Gates." He said, "But I don't think it's relevant." I said, "Well, don't you? Don't you think it's relevant?" He said, No, it's not relevant.
It's very relevant. It's very relevant.
Yes. So he admitted to me, they take money every week from Bill Gates for The Guardian, but it's not relevant to somebody raising concerns about the vaccines.
Oh, for goodness sake. I mean, it's just, you have to follow the narrative. And if you don't, it's, oh no, but when we do it, it's okay.
So we're not in the politics of right and left anymore. We're on the politics of right and wrong, actually good and evil. And
good and evil, elite versus everyone else.
And I think, us and them. And I think, you see, if being bad was a winning strategy, humans have been here for a lot longer than they tell us we have. We've been here for millions of years. We haven't really changed. We don't change very much. We're the same as we were hundreds of thousands of years ago. Same abilities. And we fine-honed our behavioural strategies. I'm going back to my behaviour now. We've evolved all that. One thing we're very good at, your life could depend whether you believed someone or not. When you met somebody, if you trusted them, they were telling the truth, that could be life-changing. So humans are pretty good, even on television, of looking and see, certainly, whether that person is telling what they believe to be the truth. I'm not sure it necessarily is the truth, but they can pretty much tell whether you believe you're telling the truth or not.
Yeah.
And politicians hate that because they're never telling the truth. So that's a good one. But also, if being bad was a winning life strategy, we've been around long enough that most people in the world would be bad.
Well, yeah.
The fact is, I believe strongly that most people are good. Therefore, good must be the winning strategy. Because otherwise, by the time we've been on this planet, we'd all be bad. Because you'd have to be bad to survive.
Yeah.
Well, we'll just get rid of the bad ones now. Because they're showing themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think when this is over, and I think it will be over, and it's going to be over sooner than we think. And for those who haven't woken up, it's going to be a bit of a jolt, isn't it?
Oh, it's going to be a shock.
Yes, I think there'll be increased need for mental health support, but I mean, they have to toughen up because it's the world we're living in. But two things: first of all, we can build something much better than we've had before because we've been in this system, we just haven't realised what was going on. And secondly, to rebuild that trust, we must hold those who've committed these crimes against humanity to account at whatever level they are. And that will send a very strong message if we're ever going to get trust back in our institutions, and also for those who seek positions of responsibility. If you ever think of doing anything like this ever again, you're going to face the hardest sanctions. Because whatever happens, I'm not going to allow us to be in a situation where this can be perpetrated against people ever again.
Wow, I mean, it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for being one of the main names in the movement that refuses to shy away from these topics. I think it plays a huge role in waking people up. Because once people have woken up as well, they need to keep the faith. They need to keep strong going. And I think people like you really help that cause. So thank you so much for coming on.
Well, we have to remember, people think, well, we can't do anything. Even when we know we don't, we're just the people, we can't do anything. Well, they think we're just drops in the ocean. We are all connected. We're with the ocean in a drop.
That's a lovely quote to end on. For more exclusive behind-the-scenes content, please be sure to subscribe to our Patreon. It really helps us cover the cost of any live streams, events, protests, or anything that we do. You'll also be seeing any behind-the-scenes footage and anything that we might be doing with Defiance Records.
Resistance GB's new series, 1,000 Words, has me, portrait artist Jake Fern, talking to some of the key figures in the movement. Half my brain concentrating on having a conversation, and the other half on making a painting. Do I succeed at either? You be the judge.
Britain's teetering on the verge of an economic crash. If you're worried about your money being inflated away, click the link below and book a consultation with Gold Bullion Partners.